Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dwarf Fortress. I decided to start this one over. I wasn't really happy with the way the other fortress was doing, and the overall tone of the videos also felt off. So, how about something different? Instead of the usual play-by-play, this series will be more of a story-based affair. And instead of using the usual voice, I decided to switch it out to a more British-sounding narrator. Let's see how this will go. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Over to you, Brian.
Welcome to the world known as the Wondrous Dimension. It is a home to many creatures, humans, elves, goblins, and many, many more. Today, we are taking a look at one of these peoples, the dwarves. They are a sturdy folk, lovers of hard work, hard stone, and hard liquor. They are the inhabitants of 4 kingdoms on these lands. The Towers of Honesty, the Ring of Action, the Merchant of Covering, and the Oceanic Lances. These are all just rough translations of their dwarven names, which I will not endeavor to pronounce. These chronicles will start with 7 of these dwarves from the kingdom, the Towers of Honesty. By the year of 131, their queen, Stintod Touchmirrors, has been ruling over the mountain halls for 4 decades, and grew concerned that the kingdom was becoming stagnant. To stoke the fire of the adventurous nature of her people, she decided to expand the realm with a new settlement. The final choice for the site was quite close to their original settlements, near the source of a small brook. Should be a good source of fresh water. And the geologists sent to survey the land gave optimistic predictions about the metals waiting to be extracted. Iron, gold, and silver, all ready to be mined. There were even hints at the presence of copper and zinc, so even a brass industry was a possibility. And the presence of flux materials will ensure that all the iron can be turned into trusty steel by the metalworkers who will call that place home. But this story starts with only 7 of these stout fellows. Among them were 2 miners, one with extra training in masonry, and the other knew how to cut the stone that they will eventually mine out. Then there was a woodworker, proficient lumberjack and carpenter. The engraver was adept at creating works of art on stone surfaces, and even got some lessons in gem cutting. The designated farmer will be responsible for the plantation of their food, the brewing of their alcohol, and eventually, he will act as a cook too. As for the first leader of the expedition, they had the administrator, dealing with paperwork and organization. He also had a knack for some doctoring work, which has always been a welcome addition to such endeavors. And last but not least, the craft dwarf of the group, who will undoubtedly make use of her knowledge of stone and wood carving, creating many trinkets and baubles, which will make this fort famous around the lands. Their provisions consisted of the bare essentials needed to start a new mountain home. Some tools, food, seeds, and ample supply of booze, and a pair of dogs and cats, mostly for sniffing out intruders, and for pest control respectively. As for the name of this new fortress, they decided to call it Doran Togum, which translates to Diamond Verses. Quite an auspicious choice if you ask me. When deciding what to call the group itself, they landed on the mysterious work. Deciphering the cultural nuances of the Dwarven language still eludes me, even after years of study. But before they set out, the engraver of the group decided to create a symbol for their party, which was showing a dwarf holding a large precious gem above their head. Simple, but quite fitting, given the name of their new home. They arrived in early spring, on the 15th of the month of Granite to be precise. Their tale begins here. Their first order of business was to take a look at the surrounding area. Just as the surveyors reported, the central feature of this valley was the source of a small brook, which flowed to the east, and was surrounded by steep cliffs to the west and south. As to where they started digging, they ultimately decided to use the southern mountainside. Like all good dwarves, the members of this group also preferred to live underground, with several meters of rock and soil above their heads. The powers that be did not tell them what kind of an entrance to build. It was left entirely up to them, and they decided to carve down a small portion of the cliff face. While the miners were busy striking the earth, the rest of the party weren't sitting idle. The lumberjack already managed to clear out the trees immediately next to the future entrance, and it was time to start organizing the logs. And with the small yard in the front complete, it was finally time to start digging down. They had some ideas about how they wanted this first hall to look, so they put their heads together and started planning. It was a well-established convention among dwarves that every fortress needs a long hallway following the main entrance. The ones settling here had other ideas. Instead of the traditional corridor, they decided to create a grand entrance hall. In the early days of the fortress, this hall was dug out of the soft sandy soil. It was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because the materials made it easy to dig, but the curse was that eventually, it will all have to be replaced with constructed stone walls and floors. But they already managed to create a rough outline, complete with dirt pillars holding the ceiling up. But they weren't ready yet. After the first level of this hall was dug out, it was time to go deeper, and create a ramp, connecting the main entrance to the lower levels of the fortress. Layer by layer, they worked their way down, deeper into the earth, hoping to reach the first stone layers below the soft and malleable sandy soil covering. Soon enough, the first couple levels of black sand gave way to a layer of yellow sand. To ensure the rest of the party were kept busy, the expedition leader ordered the construction of 2 workshops, one for carpentry, the other for masonry. It was to be a while longer before they could move everything underground, but he thought it was still a good idea to start getting things ready. After the yellow sand layer came a level of clay. The leader deemed that this was deep enough for the entrance hall, and told the miners to start digging out the edges, so the only slopes remaining were the ones on the main staircase. After this was done, it was time to start digging further into the mountain. The dwarf tasked with tending to the fort's food supply was already getting anxious about getting started on a small mushroom farm, and since it was an important early milestone anyway, the expedition leader told the miners to start digging out some rooms for it. In these early days, the group deemed 4 small plots more than enough to satisfy their needs for food and drinks, but they also needed a place to store the harvest, so another hall was carved out for the food and drink stockpiles. As for the all-important distillery, a couple of small rooms were set aside, one of which ended up housing this staple of dwarven industry. It is a tradition among dwarves that one of these has to be built as soon as possible. They are known for a lot of things, but their love of alcohol is by far one of the most well-known stereotypes about them. The fact that the expedition leader was visibly getting choked up about the sight of this new brewery wasn't helping to dispel these clichés. The next order of business was the emptying of the wagon that they used to haul their initial supplies to this new site. The leader deemed that the entrance hall will make a great temporary storage space, so he told the rest of the party to start hauling everything down there. With the rooms for the farms complete, the first plots could at last be laid down. As for the food storages, the dwarves thought that they should be close to the farms, so everything can be dealt with locally. The little room set aside for this purpose was divided into 3 sections. The smallest one was set aside for the seeds, the next one was portioned out for the barrels holding the solid food stuffs, while the last, and biggest space was set aside for the many barrels that will hold the fortress's alcohol supply. With these first jobs progressing nicely, the leader's attention once again turned towards digging. These soft dirt layers are very convenient when it comes to carving out big empty halls for storages, but they don't make for a good living space. Dwarves much prefer to dig their accommodations out of trusty stone, not this damp, musty dirt. So, he told the miners to start working on the main stairwell. This is the main artery of all good dwarven fortresses across the land, regardless of cultural differences between the 4 kingdoms. If there is a single unifying architectural feature that all of them have, it's this central shaft that allows them to move up and down between the levels. There are some differences. Some northern forts like to use a spiraling series of ramps, others use fancy patterns to create theirs. These dwarves, they just use a plain and simple staircase, built in different stages. The first stage involves the digging of a boring set of stairs going up and down. Later on, they will remove the central staircase, and replace it with a pillar made out of bricks. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just as expected, the miners happily reported that they struck the first stone layers beneath the last covering of clay. As it turns out, the first couple levels will consist of dolomite. And the best news came immediately after. These layers seem to have been very rich in lignite, a form of coal. And as they kept digging down, they managed to unearth some deposits of precious gems as well. Things were looking up for these dwarves. Unfortunately, the wagon was still not empty yet. They brought a lot of stuff with them, and only had 7 pairs of hands to move stuff with, so it will be a little while longer before everything has been moved underground. Speaking of the wagon, the 2 horses that pulled it all the way deserved some rest, so a piece of land was portioned off for them, so they can graze in peace outside. Sadly, the expedition leader was unable to negotiate with the livestock dealers back home, and they ended up with 2 female horses. It would have been advantageous to have a breeding pair, but beggars can't be choosers. He also told the stoneworker dwarf to make him a table and a chair. With the possibility of the first industries being started up, it was essential to start taking stock, and start organizing things, and for that, he needed somewhere to sit down. But most importantly, with the completion of the first few levels of the stairwell, the miners could be tasked with the creation of the first few bedchambers. This was also something that was universal among dwarven civilizations, with minor cultural and regional differences. Some just dug out a tiny hole, barely enough to fit a bed and a door. Our heroes are a bit more generous, however, and each room will have space for some extra furniture beside a bed. While all that was being worked on, and with spring close to giving way to summer, the expedition leader gave the order to start planting the farms. The staple crop of every dwarven community was of course the mushroom known as plump helmets, a small purple fungi. They are a versatile little crop, but the main use is for brewing dwarven wine. It is rare for a mushroom species to be high in the sugars needed for fermentation to occur, so the discovery of this species in the underground caverns ages ago was a real turning point in dwarven history. While traditionally every dwarf are expected to take part in the planting process if they have some free time on their hand, the leader of this group had other ideas, so he told everyone that only the farmer is allowed near this job. He wanted them to get as much experience under their belt as possible, and since the farmer already had a head start, it was all up to him. He also told the miners that as soon as the bedrooms are finished, they should extract some of those precious stones they discovered while carving the stairwell. He expected them to fetch a good price once the first caravan arrives. At this point, the expedition leader was ready to start organizing things, so he needed an office. He was a simple dwarf, not needing anything fancy, so he just told the others to put the table and chair wherever they thought it wouldn't be in the way, and got to work. Since managing things and taking stock of all the items in storage was a busy job, he decided to step down as leader, so he can dedicate all his time to it. After a quick vote, the group decided that one of the miners should take over the decision-making. One of the first changes he landed on was that they should stop fishing for now. They lacked the necessary facilities to process whatever they caught, so he didn't see any point in continuing, but he told the others that they can resume once a fishery is built. As for the previous leader, he was now busy organizing the fort's inventory. It was important to have a steady supply of storage barrels and bins, so he told the carpenter to always keep some empty ones ready to go at all times. And while making a list of things, he realized that all the booze they brought with them from home was starting to run worryingly low. Needless to say, he immediately told the brewer what to do. Keeping a well-stocked drinks stockpile was his responsibility, and it will be hell to pay if he fails. The next order of business was a temporary jeweler's workshop. They had a couple precious gems waiting to be cut. And when the first caravan arrives, they will pay more for them if they are nicely cut and polished. Since the engraver dwarf already had some experience at this, the newly appointed leader told everyone that only she can do this. With some bedrooms already carved out, it was time to start furnishing them. A simple bed in each will suffice for now. So, the manager was told to start organizing the production of 20 beds and 20 stone doors. And the leader was a fan of uniformity, so he told them to only use dolomite for the doors. He thought it would fit in nicely with the already pink-hued walls. As a secondary side job for the miners, he told them to remove the center of the stairwell. By the 19th of the month of hematite, the wagon was finally completely empty. It was time to disassemble it, and reclaim the wood that was used to make it. There were already some beds ready in the central stockpile, and the leader was getting really annoyed at seeing his comrades sleeping wherever they could. It was high time some rooms were built. Unfortunately for them, only one door was finished at this point, but tired dwarves can still sleep in beds that don't belong to any room, so even with 3 beds placed, things were already better than they were before. On the 27th of hematite, the first migrants arrived. The first one to step through the entrance told the leader that the officials back home decided to help the new fort out by organizing 2 more waves of immigrants. But that is all they can do for Diamond versus. After the second influx of dwarves in the autumn, it will be up to the caravans to convince any further dwarves to come to this place. If the traders see that the fort is not only succeeding, but positively prospering, the news will spread like wildfire, attracting more dwarves to the site. By the start of the month of Malachite, the leader was getting irritated by the lack of speed in the masonry shop. When asked, the excuse given by the stoneworker was that he had to make long trips to move the stones from the mines to the workshop. Understanding this, a new shop was built near the stairs, so these trips can be made much shorter. Thankfully, the carpentry shop was already close to the wood stockpiles outside, so the beds were being made at a good enough speed, and more bedrooms could be created quite quickly. But there was one problem with these bedrooms. Some of the walls turned out to be containing veins of lignite, and a couple clusters of gems. Dwarves are not known for their wasteful nature, so the leader gave the order to mine them out, and when they are done, these holes can be filled in, but he wasn't comfortable with leaving useful materials unexploited. With autumn fast approaching, the next order of business was the construction of a trade depot. Since the masonry shop was moved downstairs, the site of the old one was perfect for the depot. And the supply of wood was starting to run a bit low, so it was time to cut down a couple more trees. It will undoubtedly make the elves angry, but no self-respecting dwarf cares about that. Let those stuck-up hypocrites moan all they want. The western part of the bedroom floor turned out to be very rich in minerals, even a small vein of gold was found. But the most abundant resource was still lignite, so the dwarves had an ample supply of fuel for their future metal industry. In the second half of the month of Malachite, enough bedrooms were completed that they could be given out to residents. It was a first-come first-served kind of arrangement, so if a dwarf was left without a bed, they had to wait a little longer. The leader also decided to start replacing some of the walls lost to this mining spree. Since the fort was still lacking a dependable supply of stone blocks, some temporary walls were erected from raw rough stones. When enough blocks are available, I'm sure they will decide to replace them. In fact, the leader was already creating sketches of how he will eventually replace all the cave surfaces with nice dwarven walls, made out of smooth blocks of stone. He was an avid believer of the importance of uniformity, so if some of the walls were already replaced by bricks, then all of it had to be replaced, just so he can satisfy his compulsions. But those days were still far in the future for these dwarves, so they came together, and asked the leader if they can smooth out the rough cave floors and walls in the meantime. They reasoned that it would make them feel better, and should keep them busy, and not sit idle while others are working hard. As the expedition leader was walking back up the stairs, he noticed that the miners finished removing the center of the stairwell while he was down in the bedroom floor, so he told the others to start building the central pillar. Once again, since only raw stone was available for the job, it was a temporary construction, which will be replaced later once proper building blocks are made. And thus, instead of using stone, this temporary pillar was made out of wood. Next on the agenda was the creation of some places for relaxation and contemplation. In other words, a tavern and a temple. The tavern itself will require the creation of some cups, or maybe some rock mugs, which can be done in a crafts workshop. On the 18th of the month of Galena, one of the dogs got into a fight with a possum. Nothing major, it was just a bit of a scuffle. Overall, the dog came out with a couple small bruises. As the leader inspected the new stairwell pillar, he noticed that some of the walls deeper down were a darker shade of grey, much darker than the lignite he's been seeing a lot lately. When asking the miners, they told him it was bituminous coal. All the lignite upstairs was already more than enough to last for a long time, but having access to proper coal was extra good news for the fort. As he was leaving, he stopped a couple levels below the living quarters, and told the miners to start digging out the rooms for the temple and tavern. The temple will be situated to the west of the stairwell, while the tavern will have its entrance to the east. The central chamber will serve as a form of social space, where residents can gather to drink and dance. The one on the left will be the dining hall, complete with tables and chairs, while the long room on the right will be for temporary lodgings for dwarves waiting for the private bedrooms, in case of a housing shortage. With this, the dwarves managed to create 20 bedrooms, more than enough for the number of residents at the time. The manager was asked to start organizing the creation of the different things needed to furnish the new rooms being dug out. Some tables and chairs for the dining hall, for example, but the leader also told him to order 10 altars for the temple. They only really needed one, but his reasoning was that such an important room needed the best quality furniture, so at least one of those altars should turn out better than the rest. And at long last, the first Dwarven caravan from the mountain homes have arrived. Good thing the expedition leader was thinking ahead, and they already had a trade depot ready on the surface, and the stockpiles had quite a few finely cut gems ready for trading. The trade liaison Alath made his introduction to the expedition leader, and after some back and forth about the current state of affairs around the kingdom, he asked if this new fort needed anything specific from next year's caravan. After careful considerations, the leader of the fort only asked for some pig leather, as well as some general textile goods, like pigtail cloth, and maybe some cave spider silk. The trade liaison assured him that all his requests can be easily accommodated, with a hefty premium of course. Asking for specific goods always comes at a price. As for their current offerings, it was an easy decision. They had a couple bins of leather, cloth and silk already, so the broker carefully dug through the wares laid out on the tables, and was happy to see the trader get a bit frustrated as he kept picking out the cheapest possible pieces, carefully avoiding the overpriced stuff. Just to keep him happy, the expedition leader made sure to tell the broker beforehand, give enough gems to the trader in return for the goods to ensure a satisfactory trade on his part. To survive in the long term, the fort needs more migrants, and the best way to achieve this was to start flaunting the wealth of the new mountain halls. It was a double-edged knife, of course. While spreading word about our riches did attract more migrants from back home, it also drew the attention of less savory characters. We can soon look forward to some unwanted visitors. Some of the dwarves were already worried about how exposed the central stockpile was, being right next to the main entrance, where a sneaky kobold thief can easily sneak in and grab something valuable. Once again, these new rooms had walls that had precious minerals in them, so in order to avoid wasting resources, the expedition leader ordered these veins to be dug out. Same as with the bedrooms, any unwanted holes can be patched up with some walls. With the holes in the cave walls more or less all covered up, it was time to check if they had a nice enough altar made, but all three were pretty plain looking. No matter, thought the leader, it can be replaced any time with a nicer one. And the fort also received a second wave of migrants, raising the population to 18. The number of rooms was still enough to accommodate everyone. Now that the caravan will carry the news of their success back home, the dwarves needed to prepare for more migrants, so the manager was once again tasked with the job of organizing the creation of more beds and doors. While there was only enough room for 10, he ordered 20 of each. At this point, the fort was starting to run low on stones that could be used for general constructions. Since the preferred stone was dolomite, the leader told the miners to carve out a couple extra chunks from the old veins of ore. But he knew that this problem will be remedied in the near future. Once stone blocks are being produced regularly, it will increase the available resources quite considerably. While it was far from finished, it was time to designate the new rooms for their intended purpose. The fort didn't have a big enough population to really justify the existence of temples dedicated to specific deities, so the first one was consecrated as more of a place of meditation, where all faiths can gather. The tavern was even less complete as the temple was, but the leader was getting exasperated by all the prodding questions coming from the other dwarves, asking when the place will open, so he just went ahead and told them to start using it now, and all the furniture will be installed later. And the first chapter of our tale ends here. Our intrepid dwarves managed to eke out a meager living for themselves out in the wilderness, and their early successes are already being talked about in the heart of the kingdom. If all goes well, they should see some more migrants arrive in the following seasons, but all this talk will draw the eyes of some dangers too. Thieves and monsters, hostile goblins and ancient horrors, all wanting to lay claim to their treasures. While the fort is very much still under construction, the dwarves will soon need to start thinking about setting up defenses, be it traps, a military, or a combination of both. I hope you liked the video. If you did, leaving a like and subscribing to the channel just might motivate me to make more. If you are in a donating mood, you find a link to my Ko-fi page in the description, where you can buy me a glass of water. I don't really drink coffee. Thank you for your support, and until next time, I will see you later.